Jesus said, "The truth shall set you free." But what truth was he really talking about? For 2,000 years, churches have taught you that truth means believing the right doctrines, following the right rules, accepting the right theology. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something that changed everything. The truth Jesus spoke of is not a belief system. It is a revelation about your true identity. Most people pray for God to change their circumstances, to heal their bodies, to fix their problems. They beg, they plead, they bargain with the divine. But this approach keeps you in spiritual bondage because it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You are treating God as separate from yourself, as an external power that might or might not respond to your requests. Joel Goldsmith realized that Jesus was revealing something far more radical than a better prayer technique. When Jesus said, "The truth shall set you free," he was pointing to the truth of your consciousness. The truth is this: you are not a human being seeking God. You are the presence of God expressing as your individual existence. This is not metaphor or philosophy. This single realization transforms everything. When you truly understand that your consciousness is divine consciousness individualized, you stop begging for healing and start recognizing the perfection that already exists. You stop asking God to become present and start acknowledging the presence that has never been absent. This is what sets you free. The bondage Jesus spoke of is not your circumstances. It is your belief in separation from the divine source. Every problem you experience stems from this one fundamental error: thinking you are separate from God, that you must somehow bridge a gap, earn favor, or convince a distant deity to intervene in your life. This belief creates your suffering. Joel Goldsmith called this the world of appearances. You see lack, disease, conflict, and limitation all around you. These appearances seem so real that you react to them, fight them, try to manipulate or change them. But fighting appearances only strengthens them in your experience. You cannot fix an illusion by treating it as real. You must see through it. The truth that sets you free is recognizing that these appearances have no power, no reality, no substance apart from the belief you give them. Your divine consciousness is the only presence and the only power. When you realize this deeply, not just intellectually, but as a living experience, the appearances begin to dissolve. This is not positive thinking or mental denial. This is spiritual realization. It is seeing what is eternally true rather than what appears to be temporarily real. Joel taught that spiritual healing happens not by changing conditions, but by changing consciousness. When your consciousness shifts from belief in separation to recognition of oneness, your entire experience transforms naturally. Here is where most spiritual seekers get trapped. They understand the principle intellectually. They can explain that God is all, that consciousness is one, that separation is illusion. They read the books, attend the lectures, memorize the metaphysical truths. But their lives do not change. Their problems persist. Their freedom remains theoretical rather than actual. Joel Goldsmith discovered why. Knowing truth as information is completely different from realizing truth as experience. You can know that ocean water is salty by reading about it, but until you taste it, the knowledge remains abstract. Spiritual truth works the same way. You must taste the reality of your divine consciousness through direct inner experience, not mental comprehension. This is what Joel called attaining the consciousness of truth. It requires daily practice of moving beyond thoughts about God to the actual felt presence of divine consciousness. It means learning to be still enough that the mental chatter stops and the deeper awareness emerges. This awareness is not something you create or generate. You simply stop blocking it. When you practice this recognition consistently, something remarkable happens. The truth stops being something you think about and becomes something you live from. Your consciousness shifts from human reasoning to divine knowing. From this consciousness, the truth literally sets you free because you are no longer imprisoned by false beliefs about yourself and your source. Let me be clear about what this freedom actually looks like. It is not that you suddenly have no challenges, no lessons, no growth experiences. The freedom Jesus and Joel Goldsmith spoke of is freedom from the fear, anxiety, and struggle that come from believing you are alone, vulnerable, and separate from infinite good. It is freedom from the mental prison of limitation. When you realize your true identity as divine consciousness expressed individually, you stop living in reaction mode. You stop feeling victimized by circumstances, manipulated by others, or threatened by conditions. Not because you develop a thick skin or learn to cope better, but because you recognize that nothing external has power over the infinite consciousness that you are. This recognition takes practice. Joel emphasized that spiritual realization is not a one-time event, but a deepening awareness that unfolds through dedicated inner work. Some days the truth feels clear and present. Other days the old beliefs seem to reassert themselves. This is normal. The key is consistent return to the practice of recognition, the habit of remembering your true identity. As this awareness deepens over weeks and months, you begin to notice tangible changes. Situations that once triggered anxiety now leave you peaceful. Problems that seemed insurmountable now resolve naturally. Relationships that were conflicted now harmonize. Not because you manipulated outcomes, but because your consciousness changed, and your experience reflects your consciousness. Joel Goldsmith shared the story of a woman who had suffered from chronic pain for over 15 years. She had tried every medical treatment, every alternative therapy, every healing modality available. Nothing worked. The pain was her constant companion, limiting her life, stealing her joy, defining her existence day after day. She came to Joel not because she believed he could heal her, but because she had exhausted every other option. She was desperate, but also deeply skeptical. Joel did not pray for her healing. He did not lay hands on her or perform any ritual. Instead, he sat with her and began teaching her about the truth of her identity as spiritual consciousness. At first, she resisted. She wanted healing, not philosophy. She wanted relief, not lessons about divine consciousness. But Joel persisted gently, helping her understand that her pain was not the problem. Her belief in separation from wholeness was the problem. The pain was just the symptom of that fundamental misunderstanding about who and what she really was. Over several weeks, something shifted in her consciousness. It was not a dramatic moment, but a gradual awakening to the truth that her body was not her identity, that pain was not her reality, that the infinite consciousness of God was expressing as her true being. As this realization deepened, the pain began to diminish, then disappear completely within 2 months. What happened to that woman was not a miracle in the traditional sense. It was the natural result of consciousness recognizing its true nature. Joel explained that when you stop identifying as a limited human body subject to conditions and start identifying as divine consciousness expressing, the conditions have no choice but to align with that higher identification. This is spiritual law. But here is what makes this different from positive thinking or mental techniques. The woman did not affirm away her pain. She did not visualize herself as healed. She did not try to convince herself the pain was not real. Instead, she learned to rest in the awareness of her true identity until that awareness became more real to her than the physical sensation. This process took time. Some days she felt the truth clearly. Other days the pain seemed to dominate her awareness, and she questioned whether any of this was working. Joel encouraged her to persist not in fighting the pain but in returning to the practice of recognition. Recognition of what? That God is the only presence, the only power, and the only reality of her being. The healing unfolded as her consciousness shifted. It was not instantaneous, and it required her daily commitment to the practice of moving beyond appearances to truth. But when the healing came, it was permanent. Why? Because it was not a physical healing. It was a consciousness healing. She had realized the truth of her being, and that truth set her free from the bondage of physical limitation. Another case Joel documented involved a businessman facing financial collapse. His company was failing. Creditors were demanding payment. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. He came to Joel in panic, asking for prayer to save his business, to bring in sudden clients, to somehow manifest money miraculously. His desperation was consuming him, stealing his sleep, destroying his peace. Joel did not pray for business success. Instead, he taught this man the same principle. God is not a cosmic vending machine responding to desperate prayers for material supply. God is the infinite consciousness of abundance that is already expressing as your true being. The problem was not lack of money, but lack of recognition of the ever-present divine supply. The businessman struggled with this teaching. He needed practical solutions, not spiritual philosophy. He had bills due, employees depending on him, a family to support. But Joel persisted. Your consciousness of lack is creating your experience of lack. When you shift to consciousness of divine abundance as your true reality, your outer experience must reflect that inner shift. This is not magic, but spiritual law. Over the following months, the businessman practiced what Joel taught. He learned to stop the anxious mental calculations, the fearful projections, the desperate scheming. Instead, he practiced resting in the awareness that infinite intelligence and infinite supply were expressing as his consciousness. Gradually, opportunities began appearing. New clients emerged. Creative solutions manifested. Within 8 months, his business had completely turned around. What both of these cases reveal is that the truth Jesus spoke of operates at the level of consciousness, not circumstance. You cannot think your way to freedom. You cannot mentally manipulate your reality. But when you realize the truth of your divine identity deeply enough that it becomes your living consciousness, everything in your experience naturally aligns with that realization. This is how truth sets you free. The businessman later told Joel that the greatest gift was not the business recovery. It was the freedom from fear. Even during the darkest financial moments, as he practiced recognition of his true identity as divine consciousness, he found a peace he had never known. The anxiety that had ruled his life for years simply dissolved in the presence of this deeper awareness. This is what Joel Goldsmith spent his life teaching. Freedom is not about getting what you want. Freedom is about realizing who you are. When you know yourself as the presence of God individualized, you stop begging for supply, health, or happiness. You recognize these as the natural expression of your true being. This recognition does not happen overnight, but it does happen through consistent practice. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which aspect of divine consciousness most challenges your current understanding? Now let me share with you the specific practice Joel Goldsmith used to move from knowing truth intellectually to realizing it experientially. He called it the practice of recognition. This is not meditation in the traditional sense of emptying your mind or achieving a special state. Recognition is the active practice of acknowledging what is already true about your divine identity until that truth becomes your living consciousness. Here is how Joel taught it. Find a quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Sit comfortably but alertly. Close your eyes and begin by releasing the day's concerns, the mental chatter, the endless planning and problem solving. Let your mind settle like a snow globe that stops being shaken. This settling creates space for deeper awareness to emerge naturally. Now comes the recognition practice itself. Silently acknowledge these truths. God is the only presence where I am. God is the only power operating in my experience. God is the only reality of my being. Do not say these as affirmations trying to make something true. Recognize them as what is already true, has always been true, and cannot be otherwise. Feel the difference between affirming and recognizing. As you practice this recognition, thoughts will intrude. The mind will wander to problems, plans, memories, distractions. This is natural. Do not fight the thoughts. Simply notice them and gently return to the recognition. God is the only presence, the only power, the only reality. Each time you return, you are strengthening your consciousness of truth. This is the practice that changes everything over time. Joel emphasized that this practice should be done at least twice daily, ideally in the morning before the day begins and in the evening before sleep. Morning practice sets your consciousness for the day. Evening practice releases the day's accumulation of false beliefs and returns you to truth. Consistency matters far more than duration. 10 minutes of genuine recognition is more powerful than an hour of mental wandering. But here is where most people stumble. They practice recognition for a few days or weeks and expect dramatic results. When circumstances do not immediately change, they conclude the practice does not work and abandon it. Joel warned against this impatience. You are reversing years or decades of consciousness, conditioned in separation, limitation, and fear. The reconditioning to truth takes time and persistence. Think of it like learning a musical instrument. The first days of practice produce awkward sounds, not beautiful music. But if you persist, gradually your fingers learn the patterns, your ear develops, and music emerges naturally. Consciousness works the same way. At first, recognition feels forced, intellectual, artificial. But with consistent practice, it becomes your natural way of being. Truth becomes your default consciousness. Joel also taught a complementary practice he called the listening consciousness. After your active recognition, sit in silence and simply listen inwardly. Not for words or messages, but for the felt presence of divine consciousness. Most people spend their lives in mental noise, never experiencing the deeper awareness that exists beneath thoughts. This listening practice opens you to direct experience of your true identity beyond concepts. Another powerful technique Joel shared is what he called taking no thought. Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or drink, what you shall wear." Most people interpret this as reckless irresponsibility, but Joel revealed its deeper meaning. Taking no thought means not engaging in the anxious human reasoning that assumes you are a limited material being struggling for survival in a hostile universe. Taking no thought is recognizing that infinite intelligence is already governing your life perfectly. You do not need to figure everything out, control every outcome, or plan every contingency. This does not mean you become passive or irresponsible. It means your actions flow from divine guidance rather than fearful human calculation. There is a profound difference between these two ways of living. Practice this technique when you notice yourself caught in worried thinking, mentally rehearsing problems, or trying to manipulate solutions. Stop. Recognize that you are engaging human reasoning based on the belief in separation. Then consciously take no thought by releasing the problem to infinite intelligence, not as prayer asking God to fix it, but as recognition that divine wisdom is already handling it perfectly. This feels risky at first because you are so accustomed to controlling through mental effort. But as you practice taking no thought, you discover something remarkable. Solutions appear that you never could have reasoned your way to. Opportunities open that your planning never anticipated. Life flows more smoothly when you stop trying to be the infinite intelligence and start letting infinite intelligence express through you naturally. Joel also taught the practice of witnessing. Throughout your day, as you encounter people, situations, circumstances, practice witnessing them from your consciousness of truth rather than reacting from appearances. When you see someone sick, do not reinforce the appearance by treating them as a sick person. Silently recognize, God is the only reality of this person's being. Their true identity is divine consciousness, whole and perfect. When you face a challenging situation, do not engage it as a problem to be solved through human effort alone. Witness it from truth. God is the only power here. Divine intelligence is already resolving this perfectly. No appearance has reality or power apart from the belief I give it. This witnessing does not deny practical action. It changes the consciousness from which you act. The witnessing practice trains you to live from truth rather than appearances. At first, you will forget and fall back into reacting to conditions as if they are ultimate reality. This is normal. The key is catching yourself and returning to the witness perspective. What is the truth here? Not what appears, but what is true. God is the only presence, power, and reality. Everything else is temporary appearance. As you combine these practices, recognition, listening, taking no thought, and witnessing, you build a consciousness of truth that gradually becomes your natural way of being. This is not about perfecting a technique. It is about shifting your identity from human limited self to divine infinite self. This shift is what sets you free, exactly as Jesus promised. The truth of your divine consciousness, realized and lived, is your freedom. Now let me address the obstacles you will encounter on this path, because Joel Goldsmith was honest about the challenges. The first and most persistent obstacle is doubt. Even as you practice recognition and begin to understand the truth of your divine identity, a voice in your mind questions whether any of this is real. Is this just spiritual philosophy? Am I deceiving myself? How can I be divine consciousness when I still struggle with problems? This doubt is natural and actually indicates you are taking the practice seriously. If you felt no doubt, you probably have not grasped how radical this truth really is. The doubt comes from your conditioned human consciousness, which has spent years or decades identifying as a limited material being. That old identity does not surrender easily. It fights for its survival by generating doubt about the new awareness emerging. Joel taught that you do not overcome doubt by fighting it or trying to convince yourself through mental argument. You overcome doubt through experience. Each time you practice recognition and feel even a moment of peace that surpasses understanding, you are having direct experience of your divine consciousness. These moments accumulate. Gradually, your own experience becomes more convincing than your doubt. But you must be patient with yourself. Some days the truth feels clear and present. Other days the doubt seems to dominate. This fluctuation is part of the process of consciousness transformation. The key is not achieving a permanent high state, but consistently returning to the practice regardless of how you feel. Your faithfulness to the practice matters more than your emotional experience of any single session. The second major obstacle is what Joel called the desire for phenomena. People want dramatic spiritual experiences, miraculous healings, instant manifestations. They measure their spiritual progress by outer results rather than inner transformation. This desire for phenomena actually blocks the deeper work of consciousness change. Why? Because it keeps you focused on effects rather than cause, on circumstances rather than consciousness. Joel emphasized that spiritual realization is not about acquiring power to manipulate your world. It is about recognizing the truth of your being so completely that your world naturally reflects that truth. The focus must remain on consciousness, not conditions. When you practice recognition to get healing, supply, or harmony, you are still operating from the consciousness of lack trying to become abundance. This reinforces separation. The paradox is that the less you focus on changing circumstances, and the more you focus on realizing your true identity, the more your circumstances naturally transform. But this requires genuine surrender of the desire to control outcomes. You must want truth more than you want results. You must care more about knowing your divine identity than about manifesting specific conditions. This is spiritual maturity. Many people abandon the practice when they do not see quick outer changes. Joel warned against this. The transformation happens at the consciousness level first. Sometimes it takes weeks or months of practice before you notice outer shifts. But every moment spent in recognition of truth is building a consciousness that will eventually express as transformed experience. Trust the process, even when you cannot see immediate results. The third obstacle Joel identified is what he called taking on the world's beliefs. Every day you are bombarded with messages that reinforce the consciousness of separation, limitation, and fear. News reports declare lack, disease, conflict, and danger. Conversations revolve around problems and complaints. Social conditioning teaches you to identify as vulnerable material beings, subject to random circumstances and external powers. If you are not vigilant, these world beliefs infiltrate your consciousness and undermine your recognition practice. You spend 30 minutes in the morning recognizing God as the only presence and power, then spend the rest of the day absorbing messages that contradict that truth. Your consciousness becomes divided, trying to hold spiritual truth while simultaneously accepting material appearances as ultimate reality. Joel taught that you must guard your consciousness. This does not mean isolating from the world or denying practical realities. It means consciously choosing what you accept into your consciousness. When you hear news of disaster, silently recognize, God is the only presence and power. When someone complains about limitation, silently know, divine abundance is the only reality. You are not denying their experience but refusing to accept their consciousness. This guarding of consciousness requires constant vigilance, especially in the early stages of practice. But as your consciousness of truth strengthens, you become less affected by world beliefs. You can live in the world, engage with it practically, but not be of it spiritually. Your consciousness remains anchored in truth regardless of appearances. This is living from the inside out, rather than outside in. The final obstacle Joel warned about is spiritual pride, the subtle belief that your realization makes you superior to others who have not yet awakened to these truths. This pride is particularly dangerous because it seems spiritual on the surface. You are not proud of material achievements, but of spiritual understanding. Yet pride of any kind, material or spiritual, indicates you are still operating from the separated ego consciousness. True spiritual realization is humble because it recognizes that there is only one consciousness, one presence, one being expressing as all. If you are the presence of God individualized, so is everyone else. The person who seems spiritually asleep is still divine consciousness, simply not yet aware of their true identity. Your realization does not elevate you above them. It allows you to recognize their divinity even when they do not. Joel taught that genuine spiritual awareness expresses as compassion, not judgment. When you truly realize your divine identity, you naturally see that same divinity in all. You cannot look at another person with condescension because you recognize them as the same consciousness you are. The moment you feel spiritually superior, you have fallen back into ego consciousness pretending to be spiritual realization. True realization dissolves all sense of separation. If you recognize these obstacles in your own spiritual journey, like this video to support others facing the same challenges. Subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith teachings on consciousness transformation, and comment. Which obstacle currently tests you most, and how are you working through it? Now let us explore how this truth consciousness operates in advanced practice. When you face situations that seem genuinely threatening or impossible to resolve. Joel Goldsmith shared a powerful example from his own life. During World War II, he received a letter from a young man drafted into military service. The man was terrified, certain he would be killed in combat, consumed by fear day and night. Joel did not respond with platitudes or false reassurance. He did not tell the young man to think positive thoughts or affirm his safety. Instead, he taught him this practice. Several times each day, stop whatever you are doing and recognize this truth. I am not in a body that can be harmed. I am divine consciousness, which cannot be destroyed, diminished, or threatened. My true identity is God expressing as my individual being. This is the truth of what I am. The young man practiced this faithfully throughout his deployment. Joel told him that the practice was not to create safety, but to realize the truth of his indestructible spiritual identity. Whether his body remained safe or not, his true being could never be touched by external circumstances. This recognition brought him profound peace even in the midst of combat situations. He lived, not because the practice protected his body, but because his consciousness shifted from fear to peace. This example reveals the advanced understanding of Joel's teaching. The goal is not manipulating circumstances to your preference. The goal is realizing your true identity so completely that even threatening circumstances cannot disturb your peace. You are free not when conditions are perfect, but when you know yourself as consciousness that transcends all conditions. This is the freedom Jesus promised. This is what truth delivers. Another advanced application Joel taught involves relationships. Most people experience relationships from the consciousness of need. You need love, approval, companionship, validation from others. This need consciousness creates dependent, conflicted relationships because you are constantly trying to get something from another person, and they are trying to get something from you. Both people are operating from lack consciousness, and lack attracts more lack. When you realize your true identity as divine consciousness, everything changes. You recognize that you are already complete, already whole, already filled with the infinite love that you are. You need nothing from anyone because you are the fullness of all. From this consciousness, relationships become about giving rather than getting, about recognizing divinity in the other rather than extracting something from them to fill your emptiness. Joel taught this practice for relationships. When you interact with anyone, spouse, child, friend, colleague, stranger, silently recognize, I am not looking at a limited human being. I am witnessing divine consciousness expressing as this individual. Their true identity is the same infinite presence that is my true identity. We are not two separate beings trying to get along. We are one consciousness appearing as apparent multiplicity. This recognition transforms relationships gradually. You stop being triggered by others' behaviors because you see beyond the behavior to the divine reality. You stop trying to change people because you recognize their perfection at the consciousness level. You stop feeling hurt or rejected because you know your completeness does not depend on anyone's opinion or treatment. This is relationship freedom, and it emerges naturally from consciousness of truth. Joel also applied this consciousness to work and career. Most people approach their work from consciousness of earning a living, competing for resources, protecting their position, or proving their worth. This consciousness creates stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction because it is rooted in the belief that your survival depends on your personal efforts and that resources are limited, requiring competition with others. Truth consciousness recognizes that infinite intelligence is expressing as your life work. You are not a limited person trying to succeed in a competitive world. You are divine consciousness individualized, and that consciousness naturally expresses as right activity, abundant supply, and perfect opportunity. Your work is not your source. God consciousness is your source, and your work is simply one avenue through which that infinite supply flows. Practice this in your work life. Before important meetings, challenging projects, or stressful situations, take a moment for recognition. Infinite intelligence is the only mind operating here. Divine love is the only presence in this interaction. God's perfect plan is already unfolding. I am not personally responsible for making something happen through my limited human ability. I am the avenue through which infinite wisdom expresses perfectly. This practice does not make you passive or lazy. Paradoxically, it often makes you more effective because you act from inspiration rather than desperation, from wisdom rather than fear, from confidence rather than anxiety. Your work becomes an expression of your divine consciousness rather than a struggle to survive. This shift in consciousness changes everything about how you experience your career and what you accomplish through it. Perhaps the most advanced application Joel taught involves what he called living the mystical life in the midst of the world. This means maintaining your consciousness of truth not just during meditation or spiritual practice, but continuously throughout your day as you engage with all the practical demands of human life. This is where spiritual realization becomes not a separate activity, but your way of being. The mystical life is not about withdrawing from the world to maintain your peace. It is about being so established in your true identity as divine consciousness that you can fully engage with the world without losing your center, without being pulled into the consciousness of separation, limitation, or fear. You live in the world, but from a different consciousness than the world operates from. Joel practiced this constantly. Even as he traveled, taught, counseled individuals, managed practical affairs, he maintained an inner awareness of God as the only presence and power. He taught that this continuous recognition becomes easier over time until it operates almost automatically, like breathing. You do not have to constantly think about recognizing truth. Your consciousness simply rests in truth naturally. This is the ultimate freedom. You are not dependent on circumstances being perfect to maintain your peace. You are not thrown off center by challenges or problems. You move through life from an inner stability that comes from knowing who you are at the deepest level. This is living from truth, and this is what sets you completely free, exactly as Jesus promised 2,000 years ago. Now I want to address something crucial that Joel Goldsmith insisted upon. This teaching is not about denying your humanity or pretending you have no challenges. You still have a human experience. You still face situations that require practical action, wisdom, and sometimes professional help. The difference is the consciousness from which you meet these situations. You meet them as divine consciousness expressing in human form, not as limited human struggling alone. Joel was clear that spiritual realization does not replace common sense, medical care when needed, or responsible human action. It transforms the consciousness from which you approach these things. You go to the doctor if appropriate, but you do not give the condition ultimate reality or power. You take practical action to resolve problems, but you do not believe the problem has power over your divine identity. You engage the human while knowing the spiritual. This balance is essential. Some people use spiritual teaching to avoid dealing with practical realities. They refuse medical help, ignore financial responsibilities, or neglect relationships, claiming they are living from higher consciousness. Joel called this spiritual bypassing, and it is not genuine realization. True consciousness of your divine identity makes you more responsible, more compassionate, and more engaged with life, not less. Other people get so caught up in handling the human details that they forget the spiritual foundation entirely. They live as if they are only material beings, subject to material laws, and they wonder why spiritual teaching seems irrelevant to their real life. The mystical life Joel taught integrates both. You are divine consciousness, and you have a human experience. You honor both without confusing them. As you deepen in this practice over months and years, Joel promised that certain markers indicate genuine transformation of consciousness. The first marker is increasing peace that is not dependent on circumstances. You notice that situations that once triggered anxiety now leave you calm. Problems that seemed overwhelming now feel manageable, not because the problems got smaller, but because your consciousness got larger, more spacious, more established in truth. The second marker is what Joel called the fruitage of the Spirit. Your life begins to demonstrate more harmony, supply, health, right relationships, and opportunities without you striving or manipulating. These appear naturally as your consciousness shifts. You are not making them happen. They are the natural expression of your realized consciousness. This fruitage is not the goal, but the evidence that consciousness has changed. The third marker is genuine love for all beings. Not forced niceness or spiritual politeness, but authentic recognition of divinity in everyone you encounter. You find yourself less judgmental, more compassionate, more patient with others' humanness because you see their divine reality beyond their temporary behavior. This love is not emotional sentimentality. It is consciousness recognizing itself in all forms. The fourth marker is what Joel called the listening consciousness becoming constant. You find yourself living in a state of inner listening, inner awareness, inner connection with the presence that you are. This is not something you have to create through effort. It becomes your natural state. You are established in your identity as divine consciousness, and that identity informs everything you think, say, and do. Joel Goldsmith spent his life proving that Jesus' promise is not religious theory but spiritual reality. The truth does set you free when you understand that truth is not doctrine but consciousness. The truth is the recognition of your identity as divine consciousness individualized. When you realize this truth deeply, not just mentally but as lived experience, you are freed from fear, lack, disease, conflict, and all the bondage that comes from believing you are separate from God. This freedom is available to you right now, not someday when you become more spiritual, not after years of study, not when you finally deserve it. Now. Because the truth of your divine identity is not something you achieve. It is something you recognize. It has always been true. You have always been the presence of God expressing as your individual being. You simply did not know it. The knowing is the freedom. Everything Joel taught comes down to this simple practice. Recognize the truth of your divine identity consistently until that recognition becomes your consciousness. Practice recognition in meditation. Practice it throughout your day. Practice it when facing challenges. Practice it in relationships and work. Practice taking no thought, witnessing from truth, and listening to the presence within. These practices build the consciousness that sets you free. The journey is not always easy. You will face doubt, obstacles, setbacks, and challenges. Your old consciousness will resist the new awareness. But if you persist with these practices, if you faithfully return to the recognition of truth regardless of appearances, your consciousness will transform. And as your consciousness transforms, your entire experience of life will reflect that transformation. This is the promise Jesus made, and this is the promise Joel Goldsmith proved true. So what happens when you truly understand what Jesus meant by the truth shall set you free? You stop being a victim of circumstances. You stop feeling powerless, anxious, and separate. You stop begging an external God to save you from your problems. You recognize that you are the presence of God individualized, and from that consciousness, you live in freedom regardless of conditions. This is the greatest discovery you can make in human life. Your transformation will not look like anyone else's. Your path will be unique because you are a unique expression of the one infinite consciousness. But the principles are universal. Recognition of your divine identity, practiced faithfully, transforms consciousness. Transformed consciousness naturally expresses as transformed experience. This is spiritual law, as reliable as any physical law, and available to anyone willing to practice. Joel Goldsmith gave the world this gift, the practical understanding of Jesus' mystical teaching. He proved through his own life, and the lives of thousands he taught, that consciousness transformation is not theoretical, but achievable. The truth does set you free. Not belief in truth, not knowledge about truth, but realization of truth as your living consciousness. This realization is your birthright, your destiny, and your freedom. Begin today. Start the practice of recognition. God is the only presence where I am. God is the only power in my experience. God is the only reality of my being. Recognize this truth morning and evening. Practice taking no thought when anxiety arises. Witness from truth rather than reacting to appearances. Listen for the presence within. Do this faithfully and watch your life transform as your consciousness transforms. If your understanding of Jesus' promise has been transformed through these Joel Goldsmith teachings, like this video so others can discover this freedom, subscribe for more consciousness-changing content, and comment, "I am divine consciousness," to declare your recognition of truth. Your transformation begins now. When Jesus spoke those words in the wilderness, he was not rejecting physical bread. He was revealing the greatest secret of human existence, that there is an invisible substance that sustains you beyond anything material. This is not philosophy. This is the operating principle of the universe itself. Most people live their entire lives believing that survival depends solely on external things. Money, food, relationships, health insurance. They work themselves into exhaustion trying to secure these things, never realizing they are living from the wrong source entirely. Joel Goldsmith discovered that when you truly understand this principle, everything changes. Your relationship with lack transforms. Your anxiety about tomorrow dissolves. You begin operating from a dimension where supply is already present, waiting only for your recognition of it. This is not about denying the need for physical bread. It is about discovering the source from which all bread comes, and learning to live consciously connected to that infinite supply that never runs dry. The word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not a religious concept. It is living spiritual substance. It is the energy, the intelligence, the creative power that formed galaxies and beats your heart without your conscious effort. This is what truly sustains you. Right now, as you listen to these words, your body is performing 10,000 functions without your control. Your cells are regenerating. Your blood is circulating. Your immune system is protecting you. What power is doing this? Not bread, not your effort. Something invisible and infinite. When Jesus said, "Man shall not live by bread alone," he was pointing to this invisible dimension of being. He was teaching that conscious contact with this spiritual substance is more essential than any physical food. Without it, you live in constant fear and limitation. Joel Goldsmith spent decades helping people make this connection practical. Not mystical theory, but actual daily experience of living from this invisible source. And when people truly grasped it, their lives transformed in ways that seemed miraculous, but were simply natural law in operation. Here is what happens when this understanding awakens in you. First, the grip of fear around money and supply begins to loosen. Not because you suddenly have more in the bank, but because you realize you have been drawing from a limited well when an infinite ocean was always available. Second, you stop the exhausting effort of trying to manipulate circumstances and people to give you what you need. You recognize that your good does not come from them. It comes through them, yes, but from an invisible source that is inexhaustible and already complete within you. Third, your prayers change completely. You stop begging God for things as if the universe were withholding from you. You begin resting in the awareness that the Word of God, the spiritual substance, is already flowing. Your only work is to be consciously receptive to it. Joel Goldsmith called this living by grace instead of by law. By law means you get only what you earn, what you deserve, what circumstances permit. By grace means infinite good flows to you, because that is the nature of God expressing as your very life. The practical application begins with a simple recognition each morning. Before you think about your problems, before you calculate what you need, you pause. You acknowledge silently, I do not live by bread alone. I live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. This invisible substance is my true supply. Throughout your day, when anxiety about money or health or relationships arises, you return to this awareness. You do not deny the human need. You simply refuse to believe that the physical realm is your only source. You open yourself to the invisible dimension. Joel taught that this is not autosuggestion or positive thinking. This is spiritual recognition. You are not trying to create supply. You are acknowledging supply that already exists in consciousness, in the invisible realm, and allowing it to take tangible form in your experience. Within weeks of this practice, most people notice subtle shifts. Unexpected help arrives. Solutions appear. Resources flow from directions they never anticipated. Not because they manipulated anything, but because they aligned with the true source of all good. Let me tell you about Margaret, a widow who came to Joel Goldsmith's classes in financial desperation. Her husband had left debts. Her pension was minimal. She calculated her money would last exactly 4 months. Then she heard these words, "Man shall not live by bread alone." At first, she thought it was cruel spiritual bypassing. She had real bills, real hunger, real panic. But something in Joel's teaching reached deeper than her fear. He was not telling her to ignore her needs. He was showing her a source of supply she had never considered. Margaret began a practice each morning. Before looking at her bank account, before opening bills, she would sit quietly and recognize, there is an invisible supply flowing to me right now. The Word of God, the spiritual substance, is my true source. I do not know how it will appear, but I trust it is already present. For 3 weeks, nothing visible changed. Her bank account continued its predictable decline, but something in her consciousness was shifting. The panic was lifting. She felt strangely provided for even when the numbers said otherwise. She was learning to live from a different dimension. In the 4th week, Margaret received a call from an attorney. A distant relative she barely knew had left her a modest inheritance. Not millions, but enough to clear the debts and provide breathing room. She wept, not just from relief, but from the realization that supply had been there all along in the invisible. But the greater miracle came in the following months. Margaret's consciousness had changed. She no longer lived in constant anxiety about money. She had tasted living from the invisible source, and that knowing could not be taken from her. New opportunities appeared. Her skills were suddenly in demand. Joel Goldsmith would say, this is not luck or coincidence. This is spiritual law in operation. When you cease living solely from the visible, limited, material sense of supply and open to the infinite invisible source, that substance finds ways to appear in your experience that the human mind could never orchestrate. Margaret's testimony is one of thousands. People with incurable diagnoses who discovered healing. Business owners facing bankruptcy who found invisible doors opening. Parents with rebellious children who watched relationships transform when they stopped trying to fix everything humanly and rested in spiritual supply. Here is what Joel discovered that most spiritual teachers miss. It is not enough to affirm abundance or visualize prosperity. Those techniques still operate from the belief that you must create or attract something that is absent. The real secret is recognizing what already is. The word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not something you get tomorrow if you are good enough. It is the present, continuous outpouring of divine substance. Right now, in this moment, infinite intelligence is flowing. Infinite love is expressing. Infinite supply is present in consciousness. Your work is not to make this happen. Your work is to stop blocking it with fear, doubt, and the belief that only the material world is real. When you live consciously aware that you are sustained by invisible substance, that awareness itself opens the channel for it to manifest tangibly. This is why Jesus could say to his disciples, "Consider the lilies, consider the birds. They do not labor anxiously, yet they are provided for. Not because they are special, but because they live naturally connected to the invisible source that sustains all life without effort or worry." Joel Goldsmith taught that the greatest freedom comes when you realize you are not a person trying to reach God. You are the very life of God expressing as individual being. The Word of God is not distant. It is your true consciousness. The invisible supply is not somewhere else. It is the fabric of your being. When this realization becomes living experience, not just intellectual concept, you discover what Jesus meant. You do not live by bread alone because bread is effect, not cause. The cause is spiritual substance, and you are immersed in it every moment like a fish in the ocean. Start today with this simple practice. Each morning, before the world rushes in with its demands and fears, sit quietly and recognize, I am sustained by the Word of God. Invisible substance is my true supply. I rest in this knowing, and I watch how it manifests in my day. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your own invisible supply, like this video to help others find freedom from material limitation, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith Wisdom that Transforms Consciousness, and comment which insight shifted your perspective on living by the Word of God. Beyond the morning recognition, Joel taught specific practices to maintain conscious contact with invisible supply throughout your day. The first is what he called listening prayer. This is not talking to God, listing your needs, or asking for things. It is becoming silent and receptive to the Word that is already speaking. Find moments in your day, even 60 seconds, to stop all mental activity. Do not try to think spiritual thoughts or visualize outcomes. Simply become still and inwardly receptive, as if you are listening for something just beyond the range of your ordinary hearing. In that silence, you are not waiting for voices or visions. You are opening your consciousness to the flow of spiritual substance that is always present, but usually drowned out by mental noise, fear, and planning. This is the practice that allows the Word of God to register in your awareness. Joel discovered that people who practiced this listening silence consistently began experiencing what he called God's government of their affairs. Right action occurred without their manipulation. Supply appeared without their anxious effort. Harmony established itself in relationships without their control. The second practice Joel emphasized is releasing the world's hold on your consciousness. This does not mean withdrawing from life or responsibilities. It means ceasing to believe that people, circumstances, or material conditions have ultimate power over your well-being. When someone upsets you, you typically react as if they have power to disturb your peace. When money is tight, you react as if circumstances have power to limit your good. When illness appears, you react as if the body has power to determine your wholeness. This is living by bread alone, by the material sense of things. Instead, Joel taught to pause in those moments and remember, this person is not my source. This circumstance is not my source. This condition is not my source. My source is the infinite invisible, the Word of God, the spiritual substance that nothing in the material world can touch or diminish. This is not denial of what appears. It is refusal to give it ultimate authority. You deal with the situation practically, yes, but you do not lose your rootedness in the invisible supply that is independent of all external conditions. This is spiritual maturity. The third practice is what Joel called the withholding nothing principle. Most people live in a consciousness of holding back, protecting, conserving. They withhold love until others prove worthy. They withhold generosity until they feel financially secure. They withhold forgiveness until justice is served. But living by the Word of God means recognizing that supply is infinite and constantly flowing. When you withhold, you dam up the flow in your own consciousness. When you release and give freely, you keep the channel open for more to flow through you. This is not reckless or foolish giving. It is conscious awareness that you cannot deplete infinite substance. When you give love, you do not have less love. When you share wisdom, you do not have less wisdom. When you contribute financially from a consciousness of infinite supply, you are not diminished but enriched. Joel watched people transform their financial situations, not by hoarding and controlling, but by giving freely while resting in the awareness of invisible supply. The flow that moves through an open channel is far greater than what a fearful person can accumulate and protect. These three practices work together to shift your entire operating system. Morning recognition of invisible supply. Throughout the day, listening silence to maintain contact, releasing material senses authority over your consciousness, and giving freely from awareness of infinite substance. Joel Goldsmith did not teach this as theory to be believed. He taught it as experience to be lived. Every day, multiple times daily, you return to the awareness that you do not live by bread alone. You live by spiritual substance that is infinite, present, and already complete. What happens over time is remarkable. The anxiety that once drove you begins to fade. The manipulation and control you thought necessary becomes obviously exhausting and unnecessary. A quiet confidence establishes itself, not based on visible security, but on inner knowing of invisible supply. People around you will notice the change before you articulate what is happening. They will sense a peace in you that is not dependent on circumstances being perfect. They will see provision flowing to you in ways they cannot explain. You become living proof that Jesus spoke literal truth, not metaphor. But let me be honest about the challenges you will face in living this way. The first and most persistent is what Joel called the drag of the world thought. Every day you are bombarded with messages that only the material is real, that you must fight and struggle for every crumb. The news tells you the economy is collapsing. Medical authorities tell you your condition is incurable. Financial experts tell you there is not enough. Family members tell you that you are being irresponsible if you are not worried. This collective consciousness of limitation is a powerful hypnotic force. Joel taught that you must be vigilant, not through gritted teeth determination, but through gentle, persistent return to truth. Each time fear arises, each time you feel the pull of material sense, you pause. You do not fight the fear. You simply remember, I do not live by bread alone. My life is sustained by invisible substance. This is daily work. Sometimes moment-by-moment work. You will have days when the invisible seems very invisible indeed, when only the problems appear real. Joel experienced this too. The practice is not about perfect consciousness. It is about persistent return to truth whenever you notice you have drifted into material sense. The second major challenge is what appears to be a time lag between your inner work and visible results. You begin the practice of recognizing invisible supply. Days pass. The bank account does not magically refill. The illness does not instantly dissolve. The relationship does not immediately heal. During this time, doubt whispers loudly. Maybe this is just spiritual fantasy. Maybe I am fooling myself while my real problems remain unsolved. Maybe I should abandon this and go back to trying to fix everything humanly. This is where most people give up, right before the breakthrough. Joel explained that consciousness must be established before condition changes. You cannot maintain awareness of infinite supply for 5 minutes and expect decades of lack consciousness to instantly reverse. The inner transformation precedes the outer, sometimes by weeks or months. The key is persistence without anxious watching for results. You practice recognition of invisible supply because it is true, not because you are trying to manipulate outcomes. You release attachment to how and when it will manifest. You simply remain faithful to the inner knowing, trusting the outer will align in its perfect timing. The third challenge is the temptation to mix consciousness. You practice invisible supply awareness in the morning, then spend the rest of the day operating entirely from material sense, strategizing, worrying, calculating lack. This split consciousness produces weak, inconsistent results. Joel was clear. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot hold awareness of infinite spiritual substance while simultaneously believing that only human effort and material resources will save you. One consciousness must become dominant, and it becomes dominant through repeated choice and practice. This does not mean you stop taking practical action. You go to work, you pay bills, you see doctors, you make plans. But you do these things from an inner foundation of knowing that the real source of your good is invisible and infinite, and these outer actions are simply the channels through which it flows. The transformation happens when your primary trust shifts from the visible to the invisible. When your deepest confidence is no longer in your bank balance, but in the Word of God that sustains you. When you know yourself as spiritual being, not material body, desperately trying to survive. Here is what Joel discovered helps most during challenging times. Keep a spiritual journal where you record every evidence of invisible supply manifesting. The unexpected check, the timely phone call, the intuition that saved you from disaster, the harmony that appeared without your manipulation. When doubt attacks and problems seem overwhelming, read your journal. Remind yourself of the consistent pattern of invisible good becoming visible in your experience. This strengthens faith, not faith in your own powers, but faith in the reality of spiritual substance as your true source. Also find spiritual community. Even one person who understands living by the Word of God can be invaluable. Joel's students formed circles where they supported each other in maintaining consciousness of invisible supply when material appearances screamed lack and limitation. Finally, remember that challenges are not evidence that the principle is not working. They are opportunities to prove its reality under pressure. Each time you choose to rest in invisible supply despite frightening appearances, you deepen your realization and make the next challenge easier to meet from consciousness rather than fear. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart and you are ready to live beyond material limitation, like to support this transformative content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices from Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, and comment which obstacle you are most ready to transform through invisible supply consciousness. Now let us explore advanced integration of this principle into daily life. Joel taught that eventually, living by the Word of God becomes so natural that you no longer think about it consciously. It becomes your default operating system, like breathing. At this stage, you wake already resting in awareness of invisible supply without needing to remind yourself. Throughout your day, when challenges arise, you instinctively turn within to that source rather than panicking outwardly. Your automatic response to any appearance of lack is remembering infinite substance. This does not happen overnight. For most people, it takes consistent practice over months or years. But Joel witnessed it in his own experience and in thousands of students. The consciousness that once required great effort and vigilance eventually becomes effortless knowing. What changes at this advanced level is that life begins organizing itself around your consciousness. Opportunities that align with your highest good appear naturally. People who resonate with your awareness are drawn to you. Resources flow with remarkable timing and appropriateness, not through your manipulation, but through spiritual law in operation. Consider David, a business owner who practiced these principles for 3 years. At first, he struggled with the gap between inner work and outer results. His company was failing, debts mounting, bankruptcy looming. But he persisted in daily recognition of invisible supply, refusing to believe circumstances had final authority. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, his consciousness shifted. He stopped the anxious strategizing and controlling. He made decisions from inner peace rather than fear. He gave freely to employees even when logic said he could not afford it. He rested in the knowing that spiritual substance was his true source. The turning point came not with a dramatic rescue, but with a series of small alignments. A client who had disappeared suddenly returned. A competitor unexpectedly referred business. A solution to a technical problem appeared through an overheard conversation. Nothing miraculous. Yet the cumulative effect was transformation. 3 years later, David's business was thriving, but more importantly, his consciousness was established in invisible supply. He knew from lived experience that his security was not in market conditions or business strategies. It was in the Word of God, the spiritual substance that had proven itself faithful through every challenge. At the advanced level, you also discover what Joel called imperviousness to world beliefs. The collective consciousness of lack, disease, conflict, and limitation no longer hypnotizes you. You can witness the world's chaos without being pulled into its fear. This is not cold detachment or spiritual superiority. It is simply knowing that you live from a source that is untouched by world conditions. When others panic over economic reports, you remain calm in invisible supply. When illness sweeps through populations, you rest in spiritual wholeness. When conflict rages, you know peace that is not dependent on circumstances. This consciousness becomes a blessing to those around you. Without preaching or explaining, your peace is tangible. Your confidence in invisible good is contagious. People sense that you know something they are seeking, and they are drawn to learn what sustains you when everything around you is unstable. Joel called this becoming a transparency for truth. You are no longer trying to demonstrate spiritual principles for personal gain. You have become so established in the reality of invisible supply that it flows through you to bless everyone you encounter, often without words or conscious intention. The ultimate integration is what Joel described as conscious union with Source. You no longer experience yourself as separate from the Word of God. You realize that the invisible substance you have been recognizing is the very consciousness you are. You are not separate from your supply. You are the presence of infinite good individualized. This is the mystical awareness Jesus pointed to when he said the Father and I are one. Not two, with you here trying to reach divine supply over there. One, the infinite expressing as you. The Word of God is your consciousness. The spiritual substance is your being. When this realization becomes living experience, the very concept of lack becomes impossible. How can infinite consciousness experience limitation? How can the Word of God made flesh know absence of good? You cannot, because there is only one life, one substance, one presence, and you are it, manifest as individual expression. From this consciousness, life becomes an adventure in watching how infinite good expresses through your unique form. Supply is no longer something you try to achieve or maintain. It is the natural outflow of what you are. This is living by the Word of God in its fullest meaning. As we approach the culmination of this teaching, let me share what happens when this principle becomes your foundation. First, gratitude becomes your natural state. Not forced thankfulness for what you have, but spontaneous appreciation for the invisible substance that is constantly flowing. You wake grateful not for things, but for the presence of infinite consciousness as your life. You move through your day grateful not for circumstances, but for the Word of God that sustains you regardless of conditions. Even challenges become opportunities for gratitude because they deepen your reliance on invisible supply. Second, you experience what Joel called the peace that passes understanding. This is not happiness dependent on everything going well. It is unshakable peace rooted in knowing that your life is sourced from the infinite, and nothing in the finite world can ultimately harm what you truly are. Third, you become genuinely free. Free from the tyranny of circumstances. Free from the control of other people's opinions or actions. Free from the fear that has driven humanity for centuries. You are free because you know you do not live by bread alone, and no one can take invisible supply from you. This freedom transforms every relationship in your life. You no longer need people to behave certain ways to feel secure. You no longer manipulate or control because you are not depending on them for what only spiritual substance can provide. You can love freely because you are not extracting your supply from relationships. Your work transforms too. You no longer slave anxiously as if your job is your source. You work from fullness rather than lack, giving your best because it flows naturally from inner abundance, not because you are desperately trying to earn security through human effort. Even your body responds. When you cease living in stress and fear, believing you must single-handedly keep everything together, the body relaxes. Joel witnessed countless healings that occurred when people finally released human struggle and rested in invisible supply as their true sustainer. This is not about becoming passive or irresponsible. It is about discovering the right source of action. When you act from awareness of spiritual substance rather than material lack, your actions are more effective, more creative, more aligned with your highest good and the good of all. Joel Goldsmith's final wisdom on this principle is perhaps most important. He said that you cannot teach this to anyone. You can only live it, and your living it becomes an invitation for others to discover their own invisible supply. Your consciousness established in truth is your greatest gift to the world. Do not burden yourself with trying to convince others or prove spiritual principles. Simply live from the awareness that you do not live by bread alone. Let your peace, your provision, your freedom speak silently. When people are ready, they will ask what sustains you, and then you can share. Remember, too, that this is not a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly forever. It is daily practice, moment-by-moment choice. Some days will feel easy, with invisible supply abundantly evident. Other days will test your resolve, and you will need to consciously return to truth repeatedly. Be patient and compassionate with yourself in this journey. Joel himself faced challenges and doubts throughout his life. What made him a master was not perfect consciousness, but persistent faithfulness to truth. Each time he forgot, he remembered. Each time fear arose, he returned to invisible supply. This faithfulness is what transforms consciousness. Now you know the secret Jesus revealed in the wilderness. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. This is not religious dogma. It is the fundamental principle of existence. You are sustained by invisible spiritual substance, and your recognition of this truth opens the channel for it to manifest in your experience. Begin today, each morning before the world rushes in, recognize, I do not live by bread alone. Invisible supply is my source. Throughout your day, return to this awareness whenever fear or lack appears. Practice listening silence. Release material senses authority. Give freely from knowing of infinite substance. Be patient with the process. Consciousness shifts gradually, but each day of practice establishes you more firmly in truth. Watch for evidences of invisible supply manifesting. Record them. Let them strengthen your faith until faith becomes knowing, and knowing becomes your lived reality. You are not a material being trying to survive in a world of limitation. You are spiritual consciousness individualized, sustained eternally by the Word of God. This is your true identity. This is your infinite supply. This is the freedom Jesus came to reveal. Live from this knowing and watch your entire world transform. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, and you are ready to live by the Word of God rather than bread alone, like this video to help others discover their invisible supply, subscribe for more transformative teachings that change consciousness, and comment, I am sustained by invisible supply, to confirm your new foundation in truth.
The final realization is not about seeking, it is about ceasing the search. The profound shift in consciousness comes when we understand, deeply and irrevocably, that the kingdom is not some distant shore to be reached through striving, but the very ground upon which we stand. The greatest error we perpetuate is the belief that the divine presence is a separate entity, waiting outside of us to be pleased, earned, or begged. There is only one place where the infinite presence resides, and that is within the deepest core of your own being. It is the life that you are, the awareness that observes, the stillness beneath the storm of human thought. This presence is not a concept for intellectual debate. It is a practical, living reality available here and now. All sense of struggle, all exhaustion from striving, is rooted in the mistaken belief that you, as a finite person, must create your own good. We try to mold the world with our limited willpower, using our strength, our anxiety, and our fear to force outcomes. But I tell you, all frustration dissolves when the conscious realization dawns, I am not the door. The great secret, the one that changes how you see life, is simply this: to stand back and let the divine flow take over. Your job is not to build the bridge. Your job is to step into the realization that the bridge already exists, built of invisible spiritual substance. When we cease our frantic, personal effort to fix, heal, or accomplish, we create the necessary spiritual vacuum for the law of God to fulfill itself. Sink into the stillness. Let go of the need to control the next moment. Do not condemn the outer appearance, but instead, turn resolutely inward to the center of your being where the I dwells. Do not speak about lack, do not discuss disease, and do not entertain fear. Simply be still and know that the I within you is the totality of all fulfillment, all health, and all supply. This realization grants you immunity. You become immune to the world's panic, immune to the cycle of condemnation, and immune to the pressure of performance. Why? Because the life that constitutes your individual existence is God's life. You cannot be separated from your source, regardless of the outer testimony of the senses. This is the final breath of all human illusion. Rest in that I, be still. Let the flow be. The divine is within, the ground of being. The realization of God's presence is not a distant goal, but an immediate reality within the core of your own being. eliminating the need to search or strive externally. Cessation of human effort. True fulfillment begins when you consciously realize, I am not the doer. All struggle and anxiety cease when you stop trying to use finite willpower to create or force good outcomes. Rest in the divine flow. Success comes from standing back and allowing the law of God, the divine flow, to fulfill itself, creating a spiritual vacuum for manifestation without personal effort. Turn inward to the I. The practical path is to ignore outer appearances, lack, fear, disease, and resolutely turn to the inner center of stillness where the I, the totality of fulfillment and health, dwells. Spiritual immunity. Identifying your individual existence as God's life grants you freedom from the world's panic, condemnation, and performance pressure, establishing an unshakable connection to the source. This profound insight, which declares that the kingdom is not a distant shore, but the very ground upon which we stand, is the complete revolution of human thought. The greatest burden we carry is the fundamental misconception that we are separate from the divine source. We are perpetually engaged in the monumental task of seeking God, as though the infinite had somehow misplaced us, or as though we, the finite, could travel the vast distance required to reach the omnipresence. This constant striving, this weary, lifelong prayer for reunion, is rooted in the illusion of distance, but the truth, the core reality that eradicates all fear and all striving, is that the divine presence resides not in the heavens above you, but within the deepest core of your own being. It is an immediate reality. It is not a promise scheduled for delivery after a lifetime of sacrifice. It is the life that you are now. Look within and discover the awareness that observes the world, the simple, quiet consciousness that predates all of your human thoughts, fears, and judgments. That still center, that silent, observing I, is the very location where the infinite presence expresses its totality in your individuality. We must move beyond the intellectualization of this concept. It is not a dogma to be debated or a philosophy to be discussed. It is the practical, living reality that you must consciously realize and accept. The error that has bound humanity is the projection of divinity outward, creating a separate entity that must be appeased, earned, or begged for assistance. This projection makes us forever dependent, forever feeling less than. But when you turn resolutely inward, you discover that the source and the individual consciousness are indivisible. This profound realization that the kingdom is the ground you stand on means that you are not on a journey toward a destination. The realization is instantaneous because the presence is already here. All sense of lack, all exhaustion from striving, dissolves in this single revelation. Why should a river strive to reach the ocean when it recognizes it is already of the ocean's substance? Your human effort to fix, heal, or achieve is unnecessary because the spiritual substance of all fulfillment is already established as the foundation of your conscious existence. To understand that the infinite presence resides within is to claim spiritual sovereignty. It means that the universe exists to sustain the identity that you are. You cease to be a beggar at the door of life and become the conscious expression of the creative principle. When a challenge arises in the outer world, be it financial, physical, or relational, you do not engage with the appearance of the problem. You do not try to rearrange the circumstances. Instead, you turn inward, back to the core of your being, and affirm the single, unshakable truth. I am not the doer, the life that I am is the source. This inward turning creates the necessary spiritual vacuum, allowing the divine flow to take over. You realize your job is not to build the bridge over the chasm of lack, but to step onto the certainty that the bridge of spiritual substance already exists, built by the presence within you. This is the end of the futile search. Rest in the knowledge that you cannot be separated from your source, regardless of what the outer senses testify. The peace that passeth all understanding is found here, in this immediate reality, in the cessation of the search and the acknowledgement that you are already whole. I acknowledge your request to expand upon keynote No. 2. Focusing on the cessation of human effort, derived from the selected text in the canvas. The true source of human weariness is the relentless belief in personal responsibility for creation. We carry upon our shoulders the titanic burden of the world, attempting to arrange circumstances, manipulate outcomes, and force reality into the shape we think it should take. We mistakenly believe that we, the finite and individualized expression, must generate our own health, secure our own supply, and engineer our own happiness. This belief is the root of all struggle, the treadmill that keeps the human mind spinning in anxiety and fear. Look closely at what your so-called effort actually entails. It is not spiritual labor, it is mental agitation. It involves hours of obsessive worry, frantic planning, analyzing scarcity, and engaging in the sheer brute force of willpower. We use our limited strength, which fades by evening, our anxieties, which cloud our judgment, and our fear, which actively repels the good we seek, all in a futile attempt to mold the infinite with the finite. I tell you, all frustration dissolves at the conscious realization, I am not the doer. This realization is the great spiritual release. It is the moment the heavy stone of responsibility slips from your shoulder. When you declare, I am not the doer, you are not advocating for passivity or lethargy. You are affirming a revolutionary truth. You are acknowledging that the only operative power, the only creative force in the universe, is the divine flow, the infinite presence, the I that dwells within you. Since that presence is already whole, complete, and universally supplied, your effort to improve upon perfection is not merely exhausting, it is an act of spiritual interference. The illusion of human doing forces you to look to finite channels for your good, the job, the relationship, the savings account. When you step back and realize you are not the creator of your good, you acknowledge that your supply is not dependent upon these finite forms, but upon the infinite source that expresses through them. The frustration of failure, the exhaustion of constantly managing external events, only occurs when the personal self is desperately trying to be the source. But the moment you drop the rope of personal will and simply relax into the truth, a profound shift occurs. You cease to be the struggling, demanding personality and become the clear channel through which the divine can express. When we cease our frantic, personal effort to fix, heal, or accomplish, we create the necessary spiritual vacuum for the law of God to fulfill itself. The personal will is like static, obscuring the clear transmission of grace. By surrendering the will, by ceasing the search and the struggle, we allow the already existing perfection of the infinite to manifest as our visible experience. This is the practical application of spiritual living. Standing back, watching with inner certainty, and allowing the flow to be. The divine does not require your strained efforts, it only requires your quiet acknowledgement. The great secret, the one that profoundly changes how you perceive and experience life, is simply this: to stand back and let the divine flow take over. Human existence is generally characterized by a state of constant pushing, a mental and emotional straining against perceived resistance. We live in a delusion of cause and effect where we believe our finite actions must precede and precipitate infinite outcomes. We spend our energy desperately trying to push the world into alignment, unaware that the universe is already perfectly aligned with the divine intent. The moment of revelation, the great turning point, is the profound recognition that your true job is not to build the bridge over the chasm of human problem. Your job is merely to step onto the realization that the bridge already exists, built of invisible, eternal spiritual substance. This flow is the activity of the infinite principle in your experience. It operates independently of your fear, your anxiety, or your personal efforts. If you are striving to accomplish, to heal, or to secure your good, you are inadvertently setting up a friction, a resistance to the very current that seeks to carry you. Imagine trying to row a boat upstream while simultaneously arguing with the force of the river. It is an exhausting and needless endeavor. The spiritual discipline is not exertion, it is non-resistance. It is the conscious relinquishing of the oars, trusting the current of life itself to carry you precisely where you need to be, providing every requirement along the way. When we cease our frantic, personal effort to fix, heal, or accomplish, we create the necessary spiritual vacuum for the law of God to fulfill itself. The human mind, when active and striving, is noisy and full of images of lack, limitation, and impending disaster. This noise effectively blocks the quiet, continuous transmission of divine good. By sinking into the stillness, by truly letting go of the need to control the next moment, you silence the personal self and open the door to the universal intelligence. This quietness is not emptiness, it is the fullness of the spirit waiting for recognition. In that vacuum, where personal will has stepped aside, the law rushes in to express its inherent perfection. The fundamental truth is that the divine flow is eternally active, eternally creative, and eternally sustaining. It does not need your permission to be, it only needs your non-interference to express as your life. Therefore, the moment you realize, the power that constitutes my being is the same power that governs the cosmos, you understand that your supply, your security, and your health are not subjects for human manipulation. They are facts of the spiritual structure of existence. You simply rest in that the silent, invisible center within you. To rest in the flow is to maintain an inner posture of unwavering certainty. It means that when the outer appearance screams of chaos or lack, you do not condemn it, you do not fight it. Instead, you turn resolutely inward, affirming the principle that supersedes the appearance. You stand firm on the reality that the principle is absolute, and its fulfillment is not contingent upon the world's conditions, but upon your realization of its presence. This conscious standing back allows the flow to manifest effortlessly. You become an instrument of grace rather than an anxious planner. The bridge is built, the way is cleared, and the supply is delivered, not because you worked harder, but because you finally yielded to the reality that the work had already been completed in consciousness. Rest in that be still, let the flow be. The practical pathway out of the human dilemma begins with a profound redirection of attention. The unawakened mind is perpetually engaged in an external assessment of reality. It scrutinizes the bank balance, analyzes the symptoms of the body, and condemns the chaos in the world, believing that solution lies in rearranging these external effects. But this external focus is precisely the trap. By granting power to the outer appearance of lack, fear, or disease, we unwittingly perpetuate it. The appearance is merely the shadow cast by an incomplete or fearful consciousness. It is not the ultimate reality. The spiritual discipline required is to ignore the outer appearance and resolutely turn inward to the center of stillness where the divine I resides. You must understand that the five senses are reliable reporters of the human condition, but they are unreliable witnesses to the spiritual reality. When the outer environment screams of limitation, the impulse of the carnal mind is to fight that limitation, to try to solve the problem on its own level. This is like trying to fix the image on a screen by manipulating the screen itself, rather than adjusting the source of the projection. The spiritual master never engages with the shadow, he engages solely with the light. This process of turning inward is the sacred pivot. It is the moment you withdraw your belief and your energy from the false testimony of the senses and ground yourself in the certain knowledge of the infinite presence within. This interior dwelling place, the I, is the quiet, invisible center that is the totality of all fulfillment, all health, and all supply. This I is the divine identity you wear. It is not dependent on external proof or validation. It simply is. Therefore, when the testimony of the senses is negative, when the doctor delivers a difficult diagnosis or the ledger shows scarcity, your work is not to debate, argue, or panic. Your work is to declare, I will not entertain this appearance. I will be still and know that the I within me is untouched by this world. You must consciously refuse to speak about lack. You must turn away from discussing disease, and you must decline to entertain fear. These are the tools of the illusion, and you must lay them down. The I within is the seamless perfection of God's manifestation. It requires nothing added and nothing taken away. By standing back from the outward claimer and sinking into the consciousness of the I, you allow the infinite resources of the principle to become visible in your experience. You are not striving to make a new reality. You are simply realizing the reality that has always been present. This inward realization automatically dissolves the outward appearance, for the shadow cannot remain when the light is fully acknowledged. The power of this inner sanctuary is absolute. Rest in the I. Be still. The inevitable result of truly turning inward and resting in the principle is the acquisition of spiritual immunity. This is not a mere philosophical concept, but a palpable, practical change in your experience. Having realized that your individual existence is the manifestation of God's life, you establish a spiritual foundation that is utterly unshakable. The world continues its relentless dance of panic, fear, and scarcity, but you, having awakened to the truth of your being, are no longer susceptible to its infectious anxiety. You become immune to the universal pressure to perform, to judge, and to fear the future. This immunity grants you freedom from the cycle of condemnation. Condemnation of self, of others, or of circumstances is always rooted in the belief in duality and separation. The personal self constantly measures its output against an imagined standard, collapsing into guilt or fear when it falls short. But when you identify your life as the divine life, you recognize that there is nothing to condemn. The life that you are is perfect and whole. If a human plan fails, it is not a failure of your being, but merely the failure of the finite method. The awakened individual does not judge the self. They simply return to the inner sanctuary, knowing that the principle remains intact and ready to express a superior form. This inner sanctuary is where you become sovereign. Your worth is no longer external, tied to wealth, social standing, or success. It is absolute, inherent, and non-negotiable because it is derived directly from the source. The performance pressure that exhausts so many is based entirely on the lie that you must earn your supply or prove your worth to the infinite. But the moment the realization dawns that the life animating your form is the one eternal, undivided life, that your individual being is the very flow of the Creator, that pressure vanishes. You are not trying to be worthy, you are worth. In its purest expression, the connection between you and the source is not a bridge that can be burned or a partnership that can be dissolved. It is identity. This is the meaning of the unshakable connection. Can a drop of water be separated from the substance of the ocean? Can a ray of sunlight be separated from the sun itself? No. Your security, therefore, is not stored in a bank or dependent on a political climate. It is secured by the immutable law of the infinite. This inner certainty is what allows you to move through life with a calm, effortless grace. You walk not by the sight of the eyes, but by the certainty of the inner conviction. This realization is the final, practical step, living every moment from the understanding that the power that constitutes your being is the same power that governs the cosmos. The fear of tomorrow is rendered obsolete because the source that sustained you today is the eternal, inexhaustible supply that will sustain you tomorrow. You no longer strive to make things happen, you simply live led by the flow, demonstrating the quiet, powerful sovereignty of the realized soul, fully protected and utterly sustained by the divine presence within. We have explored the great spiritual transition, the move from human effort to divine realization. Understand that every teaching, every discipline, is merely an instruction on how to cease. You are not striving for union, you are realizing unity. The burden of creation is not yours, it is the function of the indwelling spirit. Take this truth into your daily experience. The peace you seek is not hidden in tomorrow's success, but in today's stillness. The supply you pursue is not outside your grasp, it is the substance of the I Am. Drop the oars of personal will. Let go of the need to argue with the appearance. Rest in the glorious, invisible certainty that the principle of all perfection lives, moves, and has its being as your own consciousness. This is the only work, the silent acknowledgement of the completed truth. The result is the spontaneous unfolding of grace in your life, effortless, immediate, and whole. The only necessary action is the conscious surrender to the omnipresent, omnipotent I, allowing it now to be fully realized as the seamless garment of your individual experience.